Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Module 2 of Strategy, Tactics, and Metrics Create the Space for Innovation. So in this segment, I want to first go back to Lecture 1, and I'm going to revisit a couple of things, mostly as reminders, but also to dig a little deeper on this concept of empathy, because I think we need to really understand empathy and behavioral economics and how the mind works, at least to some degree, before we can really understand how to form our leadership strategies, so that we lead for creativity, so that we lead for innovation. So I'm going to start by pulling up my slide deck that I actually posted in Blackboard for you. And share my screen real quick. This diagram where we added time as a dimension into our capacity for caring, our capacity for influence. Again, leadership being defined by these two capacities, caring and influence. And we work over time to produce relationships with the people that we're leading, and we cause more influence. And again, it's not just about our ability to influence or our ability to care, it's about our ability to scale this thing that we call caring. It's about our ability to scale this thing that we call influence. And remember that great leadership, really great business leaders, are those that cause a shift from the bottom left of this chart to the upper right. They cause a shift in normal people, and that's how I'm defining leadership. And you see the results of leadership, I call that momentum. That's when we see a measurable shift in the relationship that we've caused to occur between the ecosystem of people that you're trying to lead as a leader in a business. That would be your employees, your customers, your vendors, the people that your organization is set up to serve. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to switch again to my new camera here, which is going to allow me to draw and share ideas in a graphical way, because you all know at this point how much I like to draw stuff. I think it's a great way to get ideas across and to share philosophies. Okay, so going back to the forms of empathy, if you remember, there was tactical empathy, and there was cognitive empathy, tactical empathy, and then there was effective empathy. But both of these empathies, both of these forms of empathy can be rolled up in the work of folks like Daniel Goleman in his work on emotional intelligence. And they all have shared sort of this concept of emotional intelligence, EQ, as having four different factors. And on the left side, I've seen it drawn like this: self and others. Okay, and the ability to regulate and the ability to recognize, and then the ability to regulate. So it's a simple 4-quadrant model. It's really important to understand from a leadership perspective how emotional intelligence works and how the importance of this concept of recognition or awareness and regulation and our ability to actually control it. So, and it flows kind of like this. It kind of flows from the self to others. So first you have to be able to recognize, so you have to have awareness of your own emotional state in order to regulate your own emotional state. Okay, and if you're not aware of when you're in that, remember that fight, flight, freeze, facade, remember the 4 different modes that you're in when you're in reaction mode, when you're reacting to something. So in the face of a stressor, when you're stressed out, this is especially true in the business environment, what happens is people typically go into fight, flight, freeze, or facade mode. So fight mode, the ones we typically hear about are fight and flight. You go into fight or flight mode. Fight means you get aggressive, and your face might flush. You actually might get angry and upset, and you typically make bad decisions. We're going to come back to the bad decisions that get made a little bit, but you know what I'm talking about here. Or you freeze, you shut down, you just you don't say anything, you go silent, and you go into a freeze mode. And animals do this in nature. They have one of these 4 responses in nature, when there's a threat in their environment, when there's a threat to their physiological safety, they respond by either attacking or by freezing, playing dead, so to speak, or facade, fight, flight. Flight is running, so they actually leave. So you might, in the business environment, you might leave the situation. These are all reactions. So these are all reactions that are happening because there's this part of this region of your brain. It's the limbic system. It's like the root of your brain. You know, it's commonly drawn to look something like that. It's like the reptilian brain. It's at the brain stem. It's at the core of the brain. You know, and then you got this outer brain that really controls our thinking brain, they call it, or the slow brain in Daniel Kahneman's terms. So these reactions occur, and they lead to things that behavioral economics is trying to describe. So I'll talk a little bit about behavioral economics in a minute. So fight, flight, run away, freeze, play dead, and facade. And when you're in facade mode, think of a butterfly. It spreads its wings out. It's got big dots on it, and it tries to make itself look bigger. You know, fight, flight, freeze, facade. And that's in the business environment. That's when we're faking. Like, yeah, I'll get that done for you. And you put on a face and you pretend. And that's the act of producing a facade. Okay, so we have to be aware that we're in this reaction mode. We have to have awareness that we're in this reaction mode in order for us to actually act on it. And this is an important concept in understanding and controlling and regulating your individual leadership behaviors. And it's important to read up on this stuff and do some modeling and think about it and start to become aware of it in your personal life and in your leadership role. You have to become aware of these behaviors because they're detrimental to your future, to the future of your ability to lead. Okay. So, and then the next thing you do is you regulate this. So this is the regulation piece, is the switch from amygdala brain, from reptilian brain to prefrontal cortex brain. And like I said, Robert Sapolsky, who wrote the book Behave, and he wrote the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. He's a PhD at Stanford University, studying the actual biochemistry of this action. Like, what is it that causes us to be in one of these modes or the other mode? Super interesting science. But when we switch from react, fight, flight, freeze, facade, to response, this is the act. Remember, I told you guys in the talk, in the lecture, this is like your mom. If you're anything like me, your mom pointing at you and you're a little kid saying, slow down, use your words. You know, this is the act of shutting down the amygdala response, the limbic system, and engaging the prefrontal cortex, the occipital frontal cortex, the other parts of the brain that are actively involved in a more empathic, more sustainable thinking mode response. All right. Once you figure out how to do this, is the next stage is naturally to move into, works kind of like this, is to be aware of others. So, and these are all skills. The cool thing about this all the science behind this, all the stuff that Daniel Kahneman and company, or Daniel Goleman, Travis Bradbury, all the work that's been done on emotional intelligence, is that it's malleable. Like, you can learn. These are very, very learnable skills. You just have to practice them. And so the starting point is to become aware of your own behaviors, your own reactions, so you can convert them into more intelligent responses, which generally involves just like taking a deep breath, like taking a moment, like taking a pause and recognizing that you're in reaction mode. And then thinking about, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? I'm taking a pause, not necessarily going into full freeze mode or flight mode and leaving the situation, but actually pausing. And, you know, in time, you get better and better at this with practice. So the next step is to be aware of and to be able to recognize, it's recognition and awareness of when others are in one of these four states. And when you can do that, when you can recognize when others are in one of these four states, then you can start to gain some skills in terms of helping them to downregulate. So helping to regulate, or at least bring awareness. So I'd argue there's a couple steps here. The first is to bring awareness to the others that they're in that state, obviously tactfully and carefully, and then to downregulate. So to downregulate them so that they move into a more thinking state, into a more response mode versus reaction mode. So we want to move them from reaction to response. So they've got to go through a stage of awareness, and you have to be very careful with this. And this is a deep skill. This is a deep emotional intelligence skill that's actually super important as you grow in terms of your leadership. Now, why am I sharing this stuff with you? So the stuff about emotional intelligence and how we can maybe be a little bit more purposeful about our own down regulation of reaction experiences and the conversion of reaction to response, and then the awareness of reactions in others so that we can help them to down regulate, or we can learn the skills required to down regulate their response, because this happens at scale. And if you don't understand how this works, it's very hard for you to directly lead people, but it's even harder for you to scale leadership if you can't recognize what's going on in your ranks when you've got leaders maybe that are causing more of this fight, flight, freeze, facade mode. Like, if you don't recognize what it is, then it's hard for you to recognize that you're the one causing it, or that your leaders that are working for you are causing it. You could do a whole course on emotional intelligence. I'm not going to go into that level of depth, but I definitely want for everyone in this course to be aware of the science and the reading that's out there, and to recognize and to learn how to recognize when you're in reaction mode versus response mode. Because what happens, you see, is this is where behavioral economics comes in. You know, when you're operating out of this mode, this is what Daniel Kahneman, his Nobel Prize winning work on behavioral economics, you know, the study of why we make bad economic decisions, things that economists have been trying to figure out for decades, if not 100 years. This is basically what happens when we're in one of these, you know, lower brain function modes, is these reactions, and it results in really the source of lots of distortions in behavior. So let me share something else with you guys real quick. I'm going to show you a little codex that was built by a friend of mine. I had him on my podcast not too awful long ago. It's a codex of a whole bunch of known behavioral economics distortions. So these are cognitive biases, things that happen. Some examples here, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, you've probably heard of. This is a cognitive, or very real cognitive bias that exists, that has proven. So they've proven that people with low levels of qualification make erroneous conclusions. Basically, we have more competence than we should have when we're learning, or when we see a new domain of competence. And this is a really durable study, the Dunning-Kruger effect, across lots of populations and lots of knowledge domains, from the physical to the intellectual. They've been studying this all over the place, and it turns out we tend to overestimate our own abilities. Over and over again, we overestimate our own abilities. Now, as a leader, think about how important it is to recognize this. If you're going to take your business and pivot and go into a new domain with a bunch of people that maybe haven't done it before, it's important to know that we're going to overestimate our own abilities pretty much 100% of the time. The science behind the Dunning-Kruger effect it's clear, and we always underestimate our own abilities and the abilities of our teams. So that's one example. There's lots of other examples here. This is like I said, a very cool sort of accumulation of a bunch of effects. Attentional bias is another one. This refers to how a person's perception is affected by selective factors in their attention. So, you know, end caps in a store, and where things are located. And for example, this is a great example. People who think a lot about their Instagram profiles are much more likely to pay attention to other Instagram profiles. So there's this attentional bias. There's a whole bunch of cognitive biases that occur here. The negativity bias, negativity effect. So I can put the link to this. I'll give you the link to this in the chat. all of these are defined on Wikipedia, and they're all linked out to the sources as well. So they're all pretty much backed up by some semblance of social science. Okay. Important to know as a leader, these things happen. These when we're in these reaction modes, we make bad decisions. It's largely because of these cognitive biases, not all of which, many of which we don't understand the biological underpinnings for, but they exist and they're real. So, my opinion, it's super important to be aware of those things. Okay, next up, I want to talk about what can we do? What can we now do? So, coming back to this framework here for leadership, what are the factors that we have control over to actually cause more caring, systematically cause more caring to occur and cause more influence to occur? Well, I've spent an entire career, 20 some odd years, thinking about this and trying to figure out how is it that business works? Why is it that some leaders lead better than other leaders? And what can we do about it? What are the things that what are the levers that we can pull, the knobs that we can turn that will help us lead better? And I'm going to start with a quick description of business. I'm going to introduce you guys just very loosely to what I call the momentum framework. And then when we get to the lecture next Monday, we'll go deeper on it. All right, so switching back to my drawing. Again, my favorite mode of teaching. I want to talk about business in general. So we're going to talk about how business works, how it flows. It's common sense. All business flows, in my opinion, from this thing that we call income. It flows through inputs. You have to have some inputs in your business. We turn those inputs into some form of an output. Every business has different outputs in terms of its deliverables, the products or services that it produces. Every business and every organization, this applies to non-for-profits as well. And you turn those into outcomes. So here's the general flow. Income to inputs to outputs to outcomes. Okay, sounds kind of like common sense. Again, this is the momentum framework. Okay, I'm going to draw a little grid here because I believe there are two primary swim lanes that define and describe how all businesses work. The first swim lane is what I call the tactical swim lane. This is where we live and breathe and produce. Tactical. And in that swim lane, our income always looks like, at least in my world, it looks like a bag of money. And I say it's a mysterious bag of money because my customers in my world never tell me how much is in there. I'm in the business to business space. I build software products for a living. Now, I've built products for lots of other enterprises, from B2C, business to employee, business to vendor, vendor portals, customer portals, intranets, extranets, you name it, I've built it. This is what I've been doing my entire career. And usually when my customers come to me, they come to me with a bag of money. It's mysterious. They won't tell me how much is in there, but they come to me because they believe that I have these things, these tactical skills, these capabilities. I have capabilities, meaning I have skills, I have knowledge, I have tools, I have access to raw materials, yeah, that are going to help them get this thing done faster than they could do it themselves. I know how to do it. I have expertise and I know how to do this. I know how to put things together to produce at the end of the day what I'm going to call my tactical output. I'm going to call that my roadmap. I have what's required to produce the roadmap. Okay. Now, typically when they come to me, when they come to ITX, my company, they come and they say, hey, I got these features that I need built. So could you please tell me how long it will take for me to build them, for you to build them, and how much is it going to cost me? And I have to produce, in my world, every business is going to have a different list of things that it produces on this side. But in my world, I'm going to produce some code, some programming code, in any number of various languages that we support. It's going to have a user experience. the UI. It might have some documentation that goes along with that to support it. It might have, it might even be hosted, and that might be a part of my technical output. That's a service that I provide. Like we might put it up in Amazon or Azure Cloud or wherever for you. But the key is I'm going to have this list of things that my customer wants me to accomplish, and I'm going to check the boxes for them. And their hope is that the outcome they get, the tactical outcome that they get over here, after I've delivered the software, again, this applies to any sort of business construct or nonprofit, is that they get a return on that investment. Meaning they make an investment, but they're expecting some kind of arbitrage. Like they want a bigger bag of money on the other side of this equation. And here's what I found in the software world. What I found is this is a broken methodology. It doesn't really work. Like I will deliver exactly to the spec that was given to me. I will check the box. I will get my money. I'll deliver it on time, on budget. And pretty much 100% of the time, the customer is going to be miserable. And here, it took me a while to figure this out. Like, why is this not working? So like we're doing exactly what we've been asked for, exactly what was contracted, but we have miserable customers. They don't often come back. It's not because I'm not producing or delivering on my promises or keeping my contracts. We've never gotten sued for that. Like we've always delivered what we've been contracted to deliver. So what's wrong here? And I believe that the goals are wrong. And I believe that it's because we don't have our strategy well mapped out. And we're not communicating properly. And we haven't fully identified like who are the customers that we can turn into advocates. We're going to come back to that when we do the class. But I don't have my strategy well mapped out because I don't have my strategic outcomes. Like what are my strategic outcomes that I'm after? And if you think about it, go back to this model real quick. Let me share my deck here. You come back to this framework, and the reason is because have high capacity for influence here. Like I am competent. I'm delivering on everything I said I would deliver, but I'm missing something. I'm missing something here in the context of caring and measuring that I'm actually building a relationship with the consumers that I'm trying to serve. So we're going to go deeper on this when we have the lecture, but what the strategic outcome of any organization and any software product that actually human beings use is this concept of a relationship. And it's really hard to quantify. We're going to spend some time talking about that. Like that's the strategic outcome, is that we have moved people from the bottom left to the upper right of that chart in terms of caring and influence. We're not just capable and we're not just delivering. We're actually delivering in a way that they care about, like that people like want to have a relationship with you. And this is the key, I think, to any great business. And so to finish the model out here and close up this portion of the lecture, your strategic output is your painted picture of the future. Remember, too, in lecture one, I told you guys I want to be very, very clear with my words because culture comes from the words you use, the words you choose to define, the words you choose to be purposeful with. And strategy, in my opinion, strategy and tactics are two of those words. Like clearly defining what do you mean when you say strategy? What do you mean when you say tactics? And separating those things out, I think, is an incredible leadership skill. It's an incredible leadership skill. We're going to talk about it more in the lecture. I think I've asked you to read The Art of War. We've uploaded that to Blackboard. I've also uploaded a little piece on self-determination theory, which I touched on in the last lecture as well. So what's missing here? The strategic output is your vision. It's a painted picture of the future that you and your team, the team that you're leading, is going to go and create together. That's how I define a vision. It's a painted picture of the future. And a really good vision includes a few things. It includes like a clear understanding of the people that we're going to serve. And when you do it really, really well, you also understand what people you're not serving. And the best businesses that I've seen and worked with, and best software products that I've seen and built over the years, they get this. Like we know, so every company has has some percentage. Let's use Pareto's law. Like 20% of the companies or 20% of the customers that any company has, they probably don't want. Like they're non-profitable, they're painful to deal with. And it's the reason is because we're solving the wrong problems for those people and we haven't gotten clear on that. Right? So the best companies know who they serve and know what problems they solve. Excuse me, really, really clearly. And they also know what problems they've decided not to solve for those people. And the better job you do of honing in on that, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about vision and being clear and articulate with our vision language so that we maximize the relationships that we're able to produce on the other side here. And lastly, a key part of vision is to have some sort of metrics that are actually motivating. So metrics that are motivating. And by the way, here's a little hint. What do those metrics look like? Well, one, they show you how you're moving the needle on the human relationship with your business so people have a spring in their step when they come to work. And number two, they show you how you're going to be sustainable because this results in sustainability for your business. Like how are you going to make a profit? How are you going to help your customers economically profit from the things you're doing? And how are you going to extract some profit from that equation as well? And lastly, we touched on this. We started to talk about it in our last session together. We talked about motivation. And, I gave you guys something to chew on. I said, creativity is your only unlimited resource in life. You remember that? Creativity is your only unlimited resource in life. And thus, the creativity of the people you surround yourself with, the people that you put in your circle, your leadership circle, your ability to elicit creativity from them and their ability to elicit creativity from you, this is the juice, man. This is where motivation comes from. Now, running a business, I will tell you that builds software products, if you look at my financial statements, it probably doesn't take you too much thinking to figure out what my largest cost item is. It's my labor. Second largest cost item, it's clearly the healthcare to support my labor. And then third, it's everything else I do to support my labor. So labor. So on the tactical side, I need my labor, I need my people to have very clear, crisp skills. Like they need to know what they're doing, what languages they're programming in. They have to have some knowledge of the domain. They have to know how to use the tools. And they got to be able to put these raw materials together to produce code that actually functions and is beautiful for my customers. But the strategic side of my inputs, this is where creativity comes from. It's motivation. Creativity. Motivation is the wellspring of all creativity. Motivation. And we talked about this, like authentic, intrinsic motivation on the far right-hand side of that scale, like high-quality motivation. You want to maximize that for as many people on your team as you can. It's challenging, using self-determination theory, autonomy, competence. I'll write them out here for you. Competence and relatedness. You got to maximize these three components if you expect to have a motivated team. We're going to do segments on all of these words deeply. But having a motivated team to achieve that vision, to build those relationships, this is strategy. And when you do it well, it helps you find the next generation of both employees and customers that have the same inspired intent. Because your strategic income is the inspired intent of the people that your organization is set up to serve. It's the inspired intent. It's the inspired energy that you derive, from the world for the mission, the vision that you actually have as a company, the vision that you have for the painted picture of the future about how you're going to build relationships through your products and services. Getting that language right, I think, is one of the most powerful, most impactful jobs that leaders have. All right, and with that, I'm going to close up this beginning of Module 2. I do have one homework assignment for you guys. I think I stated it. It's basically read the case study, present some questions, a handful of questions, try to come up with at least 3 questions in the context of leadership, of course. Like, what are they, looking at this stuff, what do you think they could be doing better? Or what questions do you have about how they're leading? You won't all get a chance to ask them, but I will certainly call on a bunch of you in class, and I'm going to ask you to submit your questions so that I know you asked them. And yeah, that's it. So I will see you in class on Monday. Thank you so much.